These are the things that I have found in terms of that which stops you from completing the cycle and moving forward. And the first and foremost is any kind of blame. Anytime we position ourselves in fault, we polarize ourselves, and we put ourselves against something. And whenever we are in a fight, in a struggle, we are against something, it stops us from moving forward. It really does. Hi there, and welcome back to my channel. I am Dr. Kate Flynn, the Active Deconditioner. I work with human design generators and manifesting generators to guide them through the process of shedding their false self with ease and grace so that they may live in accordance with their human design. Today, we are going to talk about the deconditioning of grief. And I think right now, as we are in full swing in the holiday season, that is a time when unprocessed, unresolved grief really rises to the surface and kind of gets in our face a little bit. And it can, it can be like going through this time of year with a bit of a dark cloud over our head. So I thought now would be a great time to discuss this. And they say a lot about grief, right? So it's kind of this idea that when we have loss, whatever kind of loss it may be, that it kind of becomes a part of us, that you can't get rid of it, so to speak, that it just becomes integrated into the fabric of who you are. And yes, I agree to some extent. On another level though, I feel like grief encompasses so many different facets. And if you start to tease it apart and break it down into its component parts, then you can actually resolve a lot of it, a vast majority of it. You may always carry a little bit of a shadow with you, but there is so much you can do to shift your thought process and still get to experience joy and a life that you really love. So typically when we think about grieving, or typically when I think about it, it's really about the loved ones that we lose along the way, right? But that's only one type of grief. Really, every time one cycle ends and a new one begins, we grieve the completion of that cycle. Even when the new cycle is something we're excited about, like we move from one city to the next, we grieve our time in that city. We graduate from school, we grieve our time in school. We shift jobs, we lose friendships, we lose versions of ourselves along the way. When we get married, we grieve our single life. When we get divorced, we grieve our married life. When we have kids, we grieve the life we had before we had kids. So many things get wrapped up, and I think that's important to look at because it all accumulates, right? It all gets kind of interwoven and entangled with each other. And every time we experience a new loss, the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another, anything that has been left unprocessed or unresolved from the old comes right back up to the surface to say, hey, I'm still here. Do you want to look at me? Is there anything we can do? And sometimes we miss those opportunities. So that is what we are going to dive into today. My biological father died when I was 2. And from there was just kind of like one unfortunate event after another to a certain degree. And it was only in the last year and a half that I started to have a new awareness of things that happened after he died. And I realized not only was I grieving my dad, which logically made sense, I was also grieving who I thought would have protected me from a lot of the things I experienced after that. And that was like a whole new level. As I look back, it doesn't make logical sense, yes, of course, but it wasn't something I had considered in the 43 years prior to these new awarenesses and new understandings. So yes, I have been there. I can speak about grief and how it shifts and changes and what happens when you start to break it down to its component parts and decondition from the not self reactions to the losses that you've experienced. So these are the things that I have found in terms of that which stops you from completing the cycle and moving forward. And the first and foremost is any kind of blame. Anytime we position ourselves in fault, we polarize ourselves, and we put ourselves against something. And whenever we are in a fight, in a struggle, we are against something, it stops us from moving forward. It really does. So sometimes we blame others for opting out, for checking out, for passing on, for not doing everything they could to affect a different outcome. And when we are on the outside looking in, it looks so simple. This is what you could have done. This is what you should have done. And if you would have done these things, all would be well, and you wouldn't be gone. You would still be here. And then the opposite of that, of course, is we blame ourselves. We put ourselves at fault. There are all these things we could have done differently. If I just would have paid attention, if I just would have noticed, if I just would have reached out, if I just would have, whatever it is. And we all know if it could have been different, it would have been different, right? Some things just happen. But when we assign blame either to ourselves or others, we put that block in place in terms of being able to move forward. Another thing at play is the mental gymnastics we put ourselves through when we try to make sense of the nonsensical, right? We want the world to be a logical, rational place where things make sense, where logic rules, and that is just not the world that we live in. Things are irrational, they are abstract. Other people have so much more going on that we really have no idea about. And so we spend a lot of energy and a lot of time trying to make things make sense. And that's another thing that blocks our forward path. The last part of this is really a refusal to move on in a reality that doesn't include that thing or that person that we have lost. And sometimes we even say, like we make contracts with ourselves or decrees. We say, I will never be the same. I will never love again. I will never. And whenever we say things like that with that kind of intensity, it becomes like a legal law agreement within us. And it's really challenging to shift that energy if we don't first rescind the decree. So consider times in your life where you have done those things. Have you assigned blame? Are you stuck trying to make sense of things? Are you refusing to move forward? Have you said, I will never open myself to get hurt, let myself love like that again, whatever it is? Because all of those things are pieces of conditioning, right? Those are things that you have the power to start to move through, to bring to resolution, to come out of those cycles, those transition periods in a more authentic and new way. Will that grief always be a part of you? Maybe some of it will, but there's a lot of space between the amount that you are currently carrying and the little bit that you would be left with once you start to decondition these things. I'd like to close with a few things regarding the grieving process that it may be helpful for you to know. We kind of touched on this one already, but every time you experience a new loss, all of the unprocessed feelings associated with loss that you've had in the past, it all gets wrapped up into that same ball, and it will come front and center for you to look at and address and give you another opportunity to start to move through it. That's why when you know your friend's second cousin's uncle dies and you hear about it, you have all of this grief come out, and you may not have even known that person, but it's like the doors open and all that grief within you is just chomping at the bit to come up and to be acknowledged. And that's why new losses can feel so massive, because the weight of all of it combined consumes so many energetic resources. And when all of your power, all your resources are going to hold that grief, it really diminishes the amount of power you have to move forward, to restore physical health, to love yourself, to create a life that you love. The more you try to numb your grief or to control it, the bigger it's going to get, the more energy it's going to consume, and the more of whatever you're doing to numb it, you're going to need, right? So if you are trying to outrun your grief and you are getting really involved with exercise and running races, you're going to find that it's never going to be enough. You do 5Ks and then you do 10Ks and then you do marathons and then you do ultra marathons. and you're trying to numb the pain or control it. That's just an example. I'm not saying that everyone out there running these races is, I'm not saying they're doing it because of grief, but that could be a way that it shows up in your life. You know, if you're using sugar or alcohol or other kinds of recreational drugs, those things may diminish what you're feeling in the moment, but it will, or they will most definitely prolong your experience of grief. And as soon as you stop doing those things, all of those feelings are still going to be there, and they are going to be twice as loud as they were before. You may find it super helpful to schedule grieving time into your daily practice, weekly, maybe monthly. Like if you're looking at all of those things that you have unresolved grief about, and it is a lot of stuff, and you've tried to maybe shove it in this box or ignore it or pretend that it hasn't affected you, and maybe you fill your day so full that you don't have any time to think about it. Consider the difference between allowing a controlled release or experiencing an explosive relief if you're not proactive and preventative regarding these things now. So you can take 10 minutes. You can have 5-10 minutes maybe before bed. You just allow whatever feelings regarding grief are there to come to the surface. You breathe, you cry, you do whatever your body is kind of guiding you to do. And then you finish it. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes. You put an end timer on it, and then you revisit it the next day. You may be surprised about the things that you see or the components that reveal themselves that you had no awareness of before, but as you do, it gives you more of that understanding, and it allows you to start to move forward differently. And then finally, start to neutralize any kind of blame, whether you're holding others responsible for things that happened or yourself responsible for not doing more or making the wrong choice or whatever it was. And maybe it doesn't even have to be about forgiveness, but going back and saying, instead of this happened and it was my fault, just saying that happened. Like acceptance and surrender of whatever the circumstance was. It happened. How do I move forward now? And then you don't even have to worry about forgiveness, right? It takes that forgiveness piece completely out of the equation when you can look back and say, this happened. How do I want to move forward now? Acceptance and surrender can completely shift your forward path. So I hope that you have found this conversation helpful. I hope that it's giving you some ideas and things to consider, especially as you navigate what could potentially be a joyous, happy, and peaceful time of year. And that you open the door a little further to unbecoming those things you were never meant to be and stepping into the life you were designed to live. If any of this feels overwhelming or you're just not sure where to start, reach out, book a session. This is what I do in my practice every day. I would be honored to hold the space for you, to empower you, to give you the tools that you need to reclaim parts of you that stopped living when cycles ended. Bring those parts back to life. Create a really good life. Like that is the thing that's going to change our reality, the world that we live in. So book a session.